Varmt välkomna till EFN Råvaror denna händelserika måndag den 23 mars. Idag har både marknadsklimat i allmänhet och oljepriser kastats mellan förtvivlan och hopp kan vi säga efter en serie utspel rörande fredssamtal i Iran. Jag har en bild på oljepriset som vi ser tog en brant vändning neråt efter ett inlägg från Donald Trump på sociala medier. Han pratade om fredsförhandlingar i Iran. Senare följde ett genmäle från Iran när man förnekade detta med marknadsosäkerhet som följd. On that note, and in English, a warm welcome to Michael Stopford, a former UN and NATO diplomat and an expert in strategic communications and risk management, as well as government relations. We're here to talk about fertilizers, and we'll get there soon, but this flip-flopping in the global diplomatic context is quite remarkable. Any thoughts?
Well, it is extraordinary. By the way, thank you for having me, Gabriel. Great to be here. I think nobody can really say what's going to be happening because of obviously the American president's looking at the situation differently every day and every moment that passes. It's so extraordinarily complex. And what we're going to be getting into is the way this has repercussions all across the world, all across lots of different sectors. But it's very difficult to say what will happen at any moment. The one thing is that you mentioned that I do some communications. Of course, a lot of it is about communications, isn't it? I mean, there's what's actually happening on the ground. There's also in how things are portrayed. What is the US president saying about how this war is going? What are the Iranians saying? So some of it is sort of more presentation than on the ground, you might say.
Well, he certainly managed to portray the Venezuelan intervention as something highly successful and easy, but this seems harder to sell. This seems like a tougher sell for American audiences and global audiences.
That's the big question, isn't it? What's going to be happening in the US domestic situation? Absolutely. I think, as everybody has said, the goals of this operation, or whatever you want to call it, war, have not been clear. So what is the goal? Is it something to do with nuclear facilities? Is it something to do with regional stability? Is it something to do with the situation of the Iranians themselves, regime change, etc.? While those goals are not entirely clear, I think it's difficult to say where we're going to go every day with this.
Difficult indeed. Vi ska här i studion i alla fall leda samtalet till gödsel- och matpriser. Men jag vill börja med en bredare råvarureflektion som kommer ifrån Tony Sage. Han är vd för det australiska gruvbolaget Critical Metals. Och vi pratade om prisrörelser på marknaden.
It's certainly caused a huge change in the markets. The market sentiment was going up. But now, with uncertainty, markets always fall. And it's really affected commodities across the board. I mean, you can imagine it, even the iron ore price, the copper price, because these are all shipped seaborne, prices have really rocketed for seaborne traffic. So obviously the metal prices have reacted to that. I was surprised a little bit on gold. When there's uncertainty in the world, gold usually climbs, but gold has gone through a massive run over the last year and a half. So a breather there, and a lot of people are really concerned. So they're putting all their money into cash. So you've seen really metals across the board fall. All the stocks obviously fall because there's nervousness. And the sooner the end of this war finishes, the better it is for all commodities.
Tony Sage och hans bolag är verksamt bland annat inom utvinning av litium, en mjuk silver-vit alkalimetall som är det lättaste fasta grundämnet, fick jag lära mig när jag studerade det här. Det är också en råvara som varit utsatt för stora prissvängningar, används till batterier, elbilar och elektronik bland annat, liksom för behandling av människor med bipolär sjukdom. Så här säger Tony Sage om den råvarans prisutveckling.
The price has really been suffering over the last 2 years. It peaked around 2022. We were paying $75,000 a ton for hydroxide. We've got a mine in Austria. All the approvals, we had all the environmental license, the mining license ready to go. And then the price slid. So we've just put it in care and maintenance for now. But the lithium price was starting to recover quite nicely. It hit a low of about $8,000 a ton for the hydroxide, and that went up to about $23,000 a ton a few weeks ago. So it is on the rise. There's a lot more uses now for lithium other than EVs. You look at just the robotic sector, which is going to be massive in the next 10 years. I mean, with not only with the Tesla bots or Optimus 3, as Musk calls them, but in China as well. They're building robots very, very quickly. And each robot is 5 kilos of lithium, rare earths, etc. So you'll see a shortage of lithium being produced over the next couple of years, and the price will recover.
Dramatiska rörelser för litium alltså, Michael. There's been many dramatic commodity movers in the last couple of weeks. We talked here in the studio about sulfuric acid. Helium is an increasing concern for the chip industry worldwide, but fertilizers is a topic we don't discuss very much, but it might be one of the most impactful factors of this conflict.
Absolutely. I mean, we're talking economics here, but of course one should begin by mentioning the extraordinary sort of human cost involved. I mean, it is distressing, isn't it, to see the scenes of destruction and lives lost and everything. I mean, that's the most awful thing about this conflict at the moment. But when you look at it, when you step back and you look at all the problems with the Straits of Hormuz and everything, it is extraordinary how it throws into relief these vast global problems we have, kind of irrespective of this war. I mean, firstly, that we are so dependent on fossil fuels, isn't that right? In every possible way. Secondly, that so many of them come from the Gulf, that a vast percentage, still come right from the Gulf. And thirdly, this interconnectedness, this notion that we're not just talking about gas prices at the pump, although that's probably what you and I face every day. We're talking about oil as a feedstock. We're talking about, plastics. We're talking about aviation fuel. And then this whole question of fertilizers, which hasn't immediately sort of hit the headlines in the way that the immediate sort of oil price have.
Well, I don't think everybody understands that fertilizers are connected to the Gulf in such a strong way, or to the Strait of Hormuz for that sake.
Well, the world has two fundamental needs for fertilizer. I mean, one is nitrogen fertilizer, and the other is phosphates. And the largest, I think about 50% of world fertilizers are nitrogen fertilizers. There's also, as I say, phosphates and then some potassium. No fertilizer, no food. I mean, everybody across the world, from Sweden to Kenya to the US, we all depend on fertilizers for food production in a very dramatic way. I mean, low fertilizer application means less food production. And fertilizers are absolutely essential. An enormous amount of nitrogen fertilizer is produced in the Gulf. And at the moment, because of this war, it's not getting through. So I think like 40% of the main ingredient for nitrogen fertilizer, urea, which is produced by liquid natural gas, LNG, comes from the Gulf. And that's not getting through. That means that there is already a huge spike in nitrogen fertilizer prices, as well as some spikes in other types of fertilizer too. And this is going to lead to dramatic price increases in food, agricultural production and food, that the UN agencies are broadcasting as a really dramatic result of this conflict.
I heard a couple of alarming reports and interviews with UN representatives claiming that this is indeed an alarming problem. I presume prices go up, production goes down as well. The farmer is less inclined to
exactly right,
to try and make food without fertilizers. So this is something we might suffer from for quite some time.
Well, yes, because fertilizers is, I suppose, the most expensive input. The seeds, there's pesticides, there's fertilizers. And the less fertilizer you use, the less crop you're going to produce. And given that farming, generally speaking, is kind of a low margin activity, this is going to be dramatic in terms of food production in the future. And already the prices of nitrogen are going up dramatically. The other thing is that a lot of the countries that are most dependent on nitrogen fertilizers coming from the Gulf are some of the poorest countries that desperately depend on it. I think something like half of the nitrogen fertilizer used in Sudan and these places that are already having a lot of problems comes from the Gulf. And so, and there's no fertilizer stocks. With oil, we have these stockpiles that can be released by the International Energy Agency. There's no international fertilizer agency. So if it's not coming through, it's blocked. There's no sort of international agency ready to release supplies.
And there's not enough meaningful production in other places than the Gulf to compensate.
There's production in other places, but there's, as I say, a huge percentage. I mean, 40% of urea comes from the Gulf, 25% of ammonia, which is the key feedstock for producing nitrogen, comes from the Gulf. 20% of liquid natural gas comes from the Gulf. So all of this means a real crisis in nitrogen fertilizer production. It also has impact on other things. Sulfur is used in phosphates production, which is the second biggest fertilizer, and 50% of the world's sulfur comes from the Gulf. It is incredible how interconnected all of this is and how it all comes back to one place.
And it is very sad that the background, before this conflict started, we were looking ahead to a 2026 with potential weather phenomenon called El Nino, Super El Nino, that might affect weather patterns and cause drought, limited water supply, already affecting the same area, namely food, especially for the world's less privileged. This is a very unfortunate timing.
It's unfortunate timing, and I think they already faced, some of the poorest countries face big debt problems. Already, the harvests were not a very good prognosis, as you say, a lot of weather patterns, etc. So it's pretty desperate. I mean, it's interesting that, we think about petrol prices, about gas prices, but in a way, the more dramatic effect is indeed on fertilizers and food production.
Iran is, some ships are allowed to pass the Strait of Hormuz. Would it be possible that fertilizer that connects to food and hunger worldwide would be something worth an exception?
I mean, that's an interesting thought, Gabriel. But, who's exporting this stuff? It's the same Gulf countries, by and large, who are, quotes, the allies of the US.
Saudi Arabia,
who Iran is. Yes,
yeah.
I mean, Saudi Arabia, Qatar, which is the largest LNG producer. So, I mean, I don't quite see what incentive Iran would have to allow fertilizer commodities to go through, because they're from the same countries that they're trying to block the oil going through.
You're based here in Sweden. You run a consultancy business as well. So maybe this is too big of a problem for you to solve. But what can be done to get you to...
Well, again, it's this extraordinary interconnectedness. I mean, what this whole thing does is bring into relief the way in which what might seem a localized problem, a conflict in the Gulf, is having these enormous ramifications worldwide. And it's because we're so dependent on fossil fuels, of course, we're dependent on them coming from one place. And fertilizer is part of this whole picture. So what can you do? You can change long-term global agricultural production. You could try and make fertilizer more locally. You'd have to get the feedstock, in this case, LNG locally. You could try and have a more focus on sustainable agriculture. Even dietary changes, one of the reasons we need so much fertilizer is what we're using agriculture for, et cetera, et cetera. Even biofuels come into this too, because if oil prices are going to go up, biofuels, which are made from, which is ethanol, which is made from corn and soybeans, more agricultural production will go into these energy sources, which will again just raise the price of the agricultural products. So we're talking about enormously complex situations here that you can't do by just flicking a switch.
All right, complex situations, slow solutions so far, unless we get a quick resolution, of course, of the original conflict.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, that's why all these UN agencies like FAO and the World Food Programme and UNCTAD have produced these huge reports in the last day or two saying what a critical situation this is for the food and agriculture sector.
That's a very alarming pill to swallow, Michael Stafford, but very nice of you to come here and explain this.
Well, thank you. Thank you. No, I mean, let's just hope that that things move in a positive direction.
Det får vi hoppas. Vi hoppas också att ni fortsätter följa oss på EFN och i synnerhet oss på EFN Råvaror. Vi är tillbaka igen nästa vecka. Tack för att ni tittat.
Det här var en produktion från EFN. Ansvarig utgivare Anders Hägerstrand.